Gretchen, how can America drive real progress in addressing sexual harassment of women and men in Silicon Valley, in Hollywood, in all industries, and in everyday places when we have a man sitting in the White House who's boasted on tape of grabbing women's crotches and is currently facing allegations of sexual harassment himself?
It's such a great question. I get it asked every single day. In simple terms, the difference is that every American has a vote. We can fire people in private business, but we can't fire somebody that's been voted into office until the next election. But here's what I'm doing on Capitol Hill. I am working in a bipartisan fashion to change the laws to take the secrecy away from this issue. And I am very optimistic. I was just there Tuesday meeting with senators and members of the House that I'm going to get this bill passed. It will take the secrecy out of forced arbitration, which is in so many employment contracts right now and gives no voice to women when they are sexually harassed. And then, when that bill passes, it will land on the desk of President Donald Trump. And I hope that he will sign it to help women.
The president has said of these accusers and these accusations, it's all one big,
one of the things that I figured out in my analysis and the research and writing my most recent book, Be Fierce, was the idea that almost all the women that reached out to me by the thousands, all of them are no longer working in their chosen professional field, and that is outrageous. Why should women be stripped of the American dream? And we watch predators fall, and then the next week we're talking about, well, where will they land again with their job? Here is my challenge to American companies tonight. Let's go out and find all of those American women who work just as hard as all the rest of us for the American dream, who had it taken away from them because they had the courage to come forward and blow the whistle on somebody else. Let's go back and hire those women and put them back into the economy and forget about whether or not the predators are coming back into the workforce.
I spoke out about my experience at Fox News with Roger Ailes, but that was not my first experience with sexual harassment. In 1988, I was a college intern at a news bureau in Washington, D.C. One day, word came down that a famous reporter and producer were coming in to work in our bureau for a couple of days, and I was assigned to help them. This was my big chance to make important contacts for a future job. So off we went to Capitol Hill. My job would be to take notes so I could help the reporter put together his story for the evening news. But about a half an hour in, he started pestering me to have dinner with him. Part of me thought that might be good for my career, but he seemed too aggressive. So I said, no, thank you. I told him I had to be up early. Then he asked me to have a drink with him at his hotel. Again, I said, no, thank you. By that point, we were seated next to each other, about to eat some breakfast, and I noticed him intensely watching me spread cream cheese on my bagel. And when I lifted it to my lips, he leaned over and whispered, never before in my adult male life have I ever wished I was a bagel. Today, it's humorous. At the time, it was humiliating. I got up, I threw the bagel in the trash, then I ran to my cameraman and said, save me from this guy, he's really creepy. I begged my cameraman not to tell anybody because it was so embarrassing, but he did tell people. And a week later, I got a call from the reporter's producer. I refused to get on the phone, knowing that she would berate me for making her reporter look bad. But she called back, and then she called again, and finally my boss made me take the call. And when I got on the phone, that producer said, Allison, I heard what happened, and I am so sorry. There is no excuse for what he did, and I have told him that. You did not deserve to be treated that way. And I want you to know you were terrific, and if you ever need anything in this business, you call me. I never called that woman until now. As we were putting together this town hall, I got a hold of her and said, I could use your help. And Rosemary Freitas Williams joins me now. So great to see you.
Great to see you too.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. So, Rosemary, explain that moment. Why were you such a badass in 1988? Okay, this isn't yesterday. This was 1988. Yeah. Why did you defend a lowly, no-name intern over your big, famous reporter?
Well, first of all, I hate bullies. And not all bullies are sexual predators, but all sexual harassers and predators are bullies. Also, it happened on my watch. I felt somewhat responsible. This was my correspondent. And, you know, looking back then, you were so sweet and you were so intense and you had this blue dress on with the matching shoes, and you were going to be the best journalist ever.
I was lugging the tripod.
You were.
For you guys.
Absolutely. And you know, your enthusiasm was so charming, but also slightly annoying. So sending you out with a reporter for the day was great for your professional development. But, you know, you weren't just harassed. You were humiliated, as you say. And so he says this thing to you, and there are other men at the table, and then you have to spend the rest of the day with these men.
Yeah, working for him.
So I'm in an edit room, and I get, there's another woman at the Bureau came in and said, you cannot say anything, but I'm going to tell you something. And I said, well, it must be pretty important. And she told me what happened. And for those in the audience who aren't familiar, when you accept a confidence, there's a thing called duty to warn, and it's harm to self, harm to others, or breaking a law. Yeah. And I felt like there was a duty to warn. So he's a very tall man, and I'm 5 foot nothing, and I sat him down, and I was very close to his face, and I had a one-way conversation with him.
I'm so impressed, Rosemary, that you not only stood up for me, because obviously that made me no longer feel humiliated, it made me feel empowered, but that you took that opportunity to tell him off. I mean, that is just so impressive. Again, this was, you know, years and years ago, and I just think that we can't say that enough. And so that's the answer, is that also women need to stand up for each other, and I think that that's really important. Absolutely.
And empowerment breaks the cycle, because getting to talk to you was very important, because shame cannot be unpacked. Yeah. You immediately think it's something I did, it's something I said, and you have to be able to break that. That's how you break that cycle, is through empowerment.
You did it for me. Rosemary, so great. Thank you so much for being there for me all those years ago.
Well, thanks for being such a great journalist.
I think as men, we tend to resist engaging in the questions in sort of a deeper way, right? So we're approaching this from a point of view where we're going through our own personal experience, which is not remotely close to what women are going through, right? So the only way we can really bridge that gap, and I'll speak to the fact that it was only 3 years ago for me personally that I began to ask these questions of myself and to consider this other perspective. So unless we can really close the gap by actually taking a proactive role and sort of educating ourselves about what it's like to be a woman, and like what it's how to be a man, other than just watching these stories thinking that's terrible and saying, well, I'm glad I didn't do that. You know, we have to actively be a part of the solution, and unless we actively take a role in doing that by putting ourselves sort of through the process of re-education, you know, we're going to have a hard time having those questions.
When you hear an accusation over and over again, is to stop working with these people. I said this before, if everybody who knew about Harvey Weinstein just refused to work for him or work with him or hire him, he would be rendered powerless. So that's what we need to do. When we hear stories over and over again about predators, stop working with them. Yeah. And that's how we threaten their finances. Right. And then we threaten their freedom by getting them prosecuted and put behind bars for things like rape. Obviously, you can't do that for sexual harassment, but once we start seeing huge consequences, once we see that first person behind bars, I guarantee you there's going to be a shift in behavior across the country.
26 years now, and I've seen stories come and go, and some of them are quite powerful. I've seen movements come and go, and some are quite powerful. I've not seen something like this.
But the people I think about the most, they're the 24-year-old single working woman. Now, courage and a voice are great, but they don't put food on the table at the end of the week if you lose your job.
There are people who are not believed, not because their stories aren't true or credible, but because there's a certain kind of skepticism that comes with all kinds of identity factors, whether it's sexuality or race or class. And so we tend to think about Hollywood, and I want us to understand that this is sexual harassment, sexual assault is something that happens to women of all races, all ages, all sizes, you know, all backgrounds, religions, and until we can believe all women, every woman's voice has value, none of us really will be seen as equal.
We have to change enablers and bystanders into allies. We have to encourage men in the workplace to find the same amount of courage that women do in coming forward, in coming to our defense.
The question is not how do I be a perfect human being, right? And how do I not be a good man or a bad man, but how do we be a better man? and understand that that's going to be a lifelong process, and do the sort of intrapersonal work too, which makes us understand that, like, we are all complicit in this as men. And unless we're actually doing something to be a part of the solution, we're sort of part of the problem.
More men are stepping up. And that is an important change in what is going on. And it will take men to stand up for equality in the workplace, on the streets, and in our schools.
The responsibility when you hear an accusation over and over again is to stop working with these people. I said this before, if everybody who knew about Harvey Weinstein just refused to work for him or work with him or hire him, he would be rendered powerless. So that's what we need to do. When we hear stories over and over again about predators, stop working with them.
I think the Me Too campaign is changing everything. To have a public forum where men and women can come forward to tell, unfortunately, the worst stories of their lives publicly is creating pressure. I mean, look at how much accountability we've seen in the last few weeks alone. People who are being accused of heinous crimes, of horrible assault and harassment, they are now being held accountable. They're losing contracts, they're losing jobs, they've lost reputations. And so even if you can't perhaps sue your perpetrator because of a statute of limitations, I would still tell your story if you feel safe enough to do so, and if you have the ability to do so, because that is the way we create change.
So you've now spent some time with Mrs. Abe and Madam Peng. What's your takeaway? Have you learned anything from them about, being your counterparts or being First Lady?
We had a great time. It was nice to see them again. They were in the United States before, and we have a great relationships with all three of them.
Did you talk about your platform with them at all?
We did. We did exchange what they're working on and what I will work on and what my passion is.
Your husband, we hear a lot from him about how he thinks and feels, and it's been 1 year since the election, and perhaps not a role you saw yourself in necessarily. It might have been somewhat of a surprise. How are you feeling 1 year into this role as First Lady? How's it been for you? Has it been what you expected?
It's my honor to be a First Lady of the United States, and it was a very busy year, and we love to live in Washington. We have a very busy life, and it's exciting as well, and I'm looking forward to work on behalf of the children.
Great. And any frustrations or anything that has been unexpected or surprising for you?
It's a very exciting life, and it's a lot of things that you need to take care of, a lot of responsibilities, and it's part of being a First Lady.